It was supposed to be a moment of unity, a carefully choreographed appearance on the Jubilee balcony. But as William, Prince of Wales, stepped forward beside Catherine, Princess of Wales, something shifted. The smiles were there, the waves were perfect, but the message they were about to deliver would quietly redraw the future of the monarchy, and those watching closely knew this was no ordinary appearance. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. From the very first second, there was an energy that felt different, subtle, almost unspoken, yet impossible to ignore. This was not just another ceremonial wave to the crowd, not just another carefully timed public display designed to reassure the nation. There was weight behind their presence, a quiet gravity that seemed to press against every gesture, every glance, every pause. Observers who had followed royal appearances for years began to notice it immediately. The way William held his posture just a fraction firmer. The way Catherine's expression carried a calm resolve rather than the usual warmth expected in such moments. It was not cold, but it was deliberate. And in the world they inhabit, deliberate never happens without reason. Reports had already begun circulating days earlier, whispers traveling through palace corridors and slipping into media circles, suggesting that something significant had been prepared. Not a crisis response, not a reaction to sudden events, but something far more controlled, something intentional. Insiders hinted at private briefings, at conversations that had been unfolding quietly behind closed doors, far from the reach of cameras and speculation. And yet, even with those whispers, no one expected what was about to unfold to carry this level of quiet finality. The positioning on that balcony only added to the sense that this moment had been carefully constructed. Senior members of the royal family stood behind them, not randomly, but with a precision that suggested hierarchy, alignment, and perhaps even silent endorsement. Every detail seemed to serve a purpose, reinforcing the idea that what was about to happen had been agreed upon, structured, and timed to perfection. It was not just about who stood where it was, about what that arrangement symbolized. As the crowd below cheered, unaware of the deeper implications, those watching closely began to feel it, the shift. This was no longer just about celebrating history. It was about signaling the future. And the more one looked, the clearer it became that this moment was not spontaneous. It had been shaped, refined, and held back until the exact second it could have the greatest impact. Even the smallest details carried meaning. The pace of their movements, the measured rhythm of their gestures, the composed stillness that replaced the usual lightness of such appearances. It all pointed towards something larger, unfolding beneath the surface. Analysts would later dissect every frame, every expression, searching for confirmation of what many already sensed in that moment. That a line had been quietly drawn between what the monarchy had been and what it was about to become. And as anticipation built, as the atmosphere thickened with expectation, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was not just a public appearance. It was the beginning of something far more significant, something that had been set in motion long before the world ever realized it was happening. But what they revealed in that moment wasn't just symbolic, it was a declaration that had been carefully planned long before the world ever saw it. Long before the balcony appearance, quiet meetings were already unfolding behind closed doors, meetings that would shape the destiny of the crown. What was discussed inside those rooms wasn't meant to be public. Yet, piece by piece, the truth is beginning to emerge. It did not begin with a single decision. It began with a series of conversations, deliberate, measured, and increasingly urgent, unfolding in spaces where silence has always been power. At the center of these discussions were William, Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, not as passive participants, but as figures slowly stepping into a role that demanded more than tradition. These were not ceremonial briefings or routine updates. They were strategic, layered exchanges, each one building on the last, forming what insiders have described as a silsilate of tightly controlled consultations that left little room for hesitation. Those familiar with the inner workings of the institution began to notice a shift. The conversations were no longer just about maintaining continuity, they were about redefining it. Senior advisors were brought in, not merely to offer perspective, but to test the limits of what could be changed without breaking the fragile balance that has held the monarchy together for generations. Constitutional experts, often kept at a distance from the more visible aspects of royal life, were suddenly part of the dialogue. Their presence alone signaled that whatever was being discussed carried implications far beyond public appearances or ceremonial duties. And then came the whispers, carefully phrased, never fully confirmed, but impossible to ignore. Reports suggest that these meetings were aligning around a long-term vision, one that extended well beyond immediate responsibilities. It was not about reacting to current pressures. It was about anticipating what comes next. The idea of a modern monarchy direction began to surface, not as a public slogan, but as an internal framework, a way of thinking that would guide decisions quietly before they were ever revealed openly. What made these discussions even more significant was the growing sense of urgency behind them. The responsibilities surrounding the crown were evolving, not gradually, but at a pace that demanded adaptation. Expectations were shifting, both within the institution and beyond it. And with those expectations came pressure to lead differently, to act decisively, and to ensure that the monarchy remained not just relevant, but resilient. Hovering over all of this was the unmistakable influence of Elizabeth II. Her legacy was not simply a memory, it was a framework, a guiding force that continued to shape decisions even after her time. Those close to the process have suggested that many of the principles discussed in these meetings were rooted in long-standing philosophies she had upheld. But applying those principles in a changing world required reinterpretation, and that is where the challenge and the tension began to emerge. Because beneath the structure of these conversations, beneath the careful language and controlled environment, there was something else building. A realization that the future could not be approached passively, that waiting was no longer an option, and that the decisions being made in those quiet rooms would eventually have to face the scrutiny of the public stage. But these weren't just theoretical conversations, they were driven by pressures building both inside and outside the royal institution. Behind the polished image of royal unity, tensions had been quietly escalating. Expectations were shifting, roles were being questioned. And the pressure on William, Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, was reaching a breaking point. What the public continued to see was continuity-measured appearances, composed statements, a steady rhythm that suggested stability. But beneath that carefully maintained surface, something far more intense was unfolding. The responsibilities tied to the crown were no longer static. They were expanding, evolving, demanding more than what tradition alone could sustain. Much of this shift, according to those familiar with the inner circle, was connected to the changing role of Charles III. His position, while still central, was no longer operating in the same way it once had. And that subtle transformation created a space one that William and Catherine could not ignore. With that space came expectation, not quiet expectation, but a growing, undeniable demand for direction. The public, more connected and more vocal than ever, began to look beyond ceremonial duties. They wanted clarity, they wanted reassurance, but more importantly, they wanted evolution. The idea of a modern monarchy was no longer an abstract concept. It had become a pressing reality. And in that reality, William and Catherine were no longer just representatives of the future. They were being pushed to define it. Inside the institution, however, that push was not met with uniform agreement. There were those who believed in preserving the established structure, who saw stability in continuity and risk in change. And then there were those who recognized that holding on too tightly to the past could create fractures that no amount of tradition could repair. This quiet divide, never openly acknowledged, yet deeply felt, began to shape the environment in which decisions were being made. It was not conflict in the conventional sense, but it was tension, persistent, layered, and impossible to escape. At the same time, the scrutiny from outside intensified. Every appearance, every word, every pause was analyzed, questioned, interpreted. The media did not just observe, they dissected. And in that constant examination, a narrative began to form. One that positioned William and Catherine not as distant figures waiting for their time, but as the immediate answer to a future that seemed to be approaching faster than expected. Reports began to describe an unspoken urgency, a sense that something was shifting behind the scenes, even if the full picture remained out of reach. That urgency carried weight. It pressed against every decision, every conversation, every moment of hesitation. Because the reality they faced was not just about stepping forward, it was about stepping forward at the right time, in the right way. without destabilizing the very institution they were meant to protect. And that balance, fragile and unforgiving, required more than patience. It required resolve. In that space between expectation and resistance, between tradition and transformation, William and Catherine found themselves positioned as something more than heirs. They became, whether by design or necessity, the stabilizing force that others were beginning to rely on, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. And it was under this growing weight that their decision began to take its final shape. When the words finally came calm, measured, deliberate, they didn't just echo across the crowd below. They sent shockwaves through the entire royal narrative. For a brief moment, there was stillness, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something heavier, something that demanded attention. Then the message began to unfold, not with dramatic declarations or sudden revelations, but with a controlled precision that made every word feel intentional. William, Prince of Wales, spoke with a tone that carried quiet authority, while Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood beside him, her presence reinforcing the gravity of what was being said. This was not simply an update, it was a statement of direction. At its core, the announcement centered on the future, carefully framed, carefully delivered, but unmistakably forward-looking. There was no sense of hesitation, no suggestion of uncertainty. Instead, there was clarity, a vision that had been shaped long before this moment and was now being revealed in a way that left little room for misinterpretation. It spoke of roles that would evolve, of responsibilities that would expand, and of a commitment to guiding the monarchy through a period that demanded both stability and change. What made it even more powerful was what remained unsaid. The language, though composed, carried subtle signals, indications of transition that those listening closely could not ignore. It was not a break from tradition, but it was not a continuation in its purest form either. It was something in between, a shift. And within that shift was the suggestion that the monarchy was preparing to move differently, to operate with a renewed sense of purpose that extended beyond ceremonial continuity. The reaction was immediate, though not uniform. For some, it was a moment of reassurance, a confirmation that the future was being handled with care, that the institution remained in steady hands. For others, it was something more unexpected, a recognition that change was not just approaching, it was already underway. That realization brought a mix of emotions: admiration for the confidence being displayed, but also a quiet awareness that such confidence often comes with consequences. Media outlets moved quickly, dissecting every phrase, every pause, every nuance. Interpretations began to form almost instantly, each one attempting to capture the deeper meaning behind the carefully constructed message. Some framed it as a natural progression, a necessary evolution in response to shifting expectations. Others saw it as something more strategic, a deliberate repositioning that signaled a new phase in how the monarchy would function moving forward. But perhaps the most striking aspect of the announcement was how it managed to serve two purposes at once. On the surface, it reassured. It offered stability, continuity, and a sense of control. Yet beneath that surface, there was something sharper, something that felt like a warning, a quiet declaration that the direction had been set, that decisions had been made, and that what comes next would follow a path that had already been chosen. And in that duality between reassurance and warning, the true weight of the moment began to reveal itself. Because what was presented as a simple statement carried layers that extended far beyond the immediate reaction, hinting at consequences and changes that had yet to fully unfold. But what the public heard was only part of the story. The deeper implications were far more significant. At first glance, it seemed like a simple statement of intent. But behind those carefully chosen words lies a roadmap, one that could redefine the monarchy for generations to come. What had just been delivered was not limited to the present moment. It was structured with the future in mind, layered in a way that only reveals its full meaning over time. Those who listened closely began to recognize that this was more than reassurance, it was direction. The tone, the phrasing, the deliberate restraint in how everything was expressed pointed toward a strategy that had been carefully constructed long before it reached the public stage. And at the center of that strategy stood William, Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, no longer positioned as distant successors, but as active architects of what comes next. One of the most striking signals within that message was the idea of a more streamlined structure. For decades, the monarchy has operated through layers, roles defined by tradition, responsibilities distributed across a wide network of individuals, and expectations shaped by history. But what was being hinted at now suggested a shift away from that complexity, not a rejection of tradition, but a refinement of it, a system that prioritizes clarity over expansion, focus over formality. And within that system, William and Catherine appeared to be stepping into roles that were not just symbolic, but operational roles that carried authority, responsibility, and influence in equal measure. This shift also raised questions about how duties would be structured moving forward. If the framework was changing, then the responsibilities tied to it would inevitably follow. Observers began to speculate about a rebalancing, fewer figures carrying more defined roles, a tighter alignment between public expectation and royal function. It was not about doing less. It was about doing differently, and that distinction, subtle as it may seem, has the potential to reshape how the monarchy is perceived both within the United Kingdom and beyond. Public perception, in fact, played a critical role in understanding this moment. The world watching was no longer the same as it once was. Expectations had evolved, shaped by a demand for transparency, relevance, and authenticity. The monarchy could not exist in isolation from those expectations. It had to respond, adapt, and in some cases, anticipate what the public would expect next. The message delivered during that appearance seemed to acknowledge this reality, aligning itself with a global audience that values both continuity and change. Beyond the immediate implications, there was also the question of influence, particularly on the next generation. The decisions being made now would not only define the present structure, but also set the tone for those who will inherit it in the future. Younger members of the royal family, whether directly or indirectly, would be shaped by the framework being established, and that added another layer of significance to what was unfolding. This was not just about leadership today, it was about shaping leadership for tomorrow. Experts and analysts, though cautious in their interpretations, began to describe what they were witnessing as a controlled transition strategy, not abrupt, not reactive, but deliberate, carefully paced, designed to guide the monarchy through change without allowing instability to take hold. And yet, as clear as this vision may have appeared to some, it was equally clear that such a direction would not exist without resistance. And yet, not everyone within the royal orbit may be aligned with this vision. While the public applauded, the real reactions were unfolding far from the cameras behind palace walls, where silence often speaks louder than words. Inside those walls, the atmosphere was far more complicated than the unity projected to the world. What appeared outwardly as a confident, forward-moving declaration carried very different meanings depending on where one stood within the institution. For some, it was a necessary step, a carefully timed move that ensured stability in a moment of growing uncertainty. But for others, it felt like a shift that had come too quickly, too decisively, leaving little room for adjustment. The divide was not loud, not openly expressed, but it was present. And in a system built on hierarchy and tradition, even the smallest shift in sentiment can carry enormous weight. Those aligned with a more traditional view of the monarchy found themselves unsettled, not necessarily by the content of the announcement, but by what it implied. Change, when it comes gradually, can be absorbed. But this felt different. It felt structured, intentional, as though the direction had already been determined, leaving little space for debate. Reports began to circulate, carefully phrased, never confirmed, suggesting unease among certain senior figures who had long operated within a framework that prioritized continuity above all else. For them, this new approach raised questions, not about its necessity, but about its pace. At the same time, senior aides moved quickly, working behind the scenes to manage the internal dynamics that inevitably follow moments like this. Their role was not just administrative, it was strategic, ensuring that communication remained controlled, that tensions did not escalate, and that the appearance of unity remained intact. Because within the monarchy, perception is not separate from reality. It is part of it, and maintaining that perception requires constant, deliberate effort. Yet even with those efforts, subtle shifts began to emerge. Influence, once clearly defined, started to feel more fluid. Authority, traditionally anchored in established roles, began to redistribute itself in ways that were not immediately visible, but deeply felt by those within the system. These were not dramatic changes. There were no public confrontations, no overt disagreements. But there were signals, small, quiet indicators, that the balance was evolving. Palace insiders, speaking in careful tones, hinted at what they described as unspoken resistance. Not opposition in the conventional sense, but hesitation. A cautious response to a future that, while inevitable, was arriving in a form that not everyone had anticipated. This resistance did not manifest in direct challenges. Instead, it existed in the spaces between decisions, in the pauses between actions, in the subtle recalibrations that occur when an institution begins to adjust itself from within. And at the center of all this was a delicate balance between unity and control. Too much control, and the appearance of unity risks becoming strained. Too little, and the structure itself begins to weaken. Navigating that balance requires precision, patience, and an understanding that every move carries consequences beyond its immediate effect. It is a constant negotiation, one that rarely reveals itself openly, but shapes everything beneath the surface. What made this moment particularly significant was not just the reaction itself, but what it revealed about the state of the institution. That even in a system designed to project stability, there are undercurrents that cannot be entirely contained. And those undercurrents, once set in motion, have a way of extending beyond the spaces in which they begin. But beyond the palace walls, the impact of this moment was already taking on a life of its own. Across the world, millions watched and interpreted the moment in their own way. But one thing was clear. The future of the monarchy now felt closer than ever. What had unfolded on that balcony did not remain confined to a single place or a single audience. Within minutes, it traveled across borders, across cultures, across platforms, transforming from a carefully delivered message into a global moment of interpretation. Headlines began to form almost instantly, each one attempting to define what had just occurred, each one searching for meaning within the measured words of William, Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales. Some described it as a turning point, others called it a signal, but regardless of how it was framed, the scale of its impact was undeniable. The media, both traditional and digital, amplified the moment in ways that extended far beyond its original setting. News outlets dissected every aspect of the announcement, analyzing tone, intent, and implication, with relentless focus. Commentators drew connections to broader shifts within the monarchy, suggesting that what had been said was only one part of a much larger transformation already underway. And as these interpretations spread, they began to shape how the public understood not just the message, but the future it pointed toward. Public sentiment, in many ways, leaned toward support. There was a sense of reassurance in seeing a clear direction, in witnessing what appeared to be confident leadership emerging at a critical time. For many, William and Catherine represented stability within change, a balance that felt both necessary and reassuring. Their presence, their composure, and the clarity of their message combined to strengthen an image that had been building gradually over time, not just as figures of tradition, but as figures capable of guiding that tradition into something new. At the same time, social media transformed the moment into something even more immediate, more dynamic. Conversations unfolded in real time, reactions layered upon reactions, interpretations evolving with every passing second. Some focused on the symbolism, others on the implications, and many on what it might mean for the future of the monarchy as a whole. Speculation intensified, not in a chaotic way, but in a way that reflected genuine curiosity, a collective attempt to understand what had just been set in motion. Comparisons to past royal transitions began to emerge, drawing parallels between this moment and those that had defined previous eras. But there was also a recognition that this felt different, not because of the scale, but because of the timing. The world in which this transition was taking place was more connected, more immediate, and more demanding than ever before. And that difference gave the moment a unique weight, one that could not simply be measured against history. As these interpretations continued to spread, one idea began to take hold more strongly than any other, that change was not something distant, not something that would unfold slowly over time. It was already happening, quietly, deliberately, but undeniably. And within that realization, the perception of William and Catherine shifted even further. They were no longer just preparing for the future. They were already shaping it. And yet, as the noise of reaction began to settle, as the initial wave of interpretation gave way to deeper reflection, a more focused question started to emerge. Not about what had been said, but about what it truly meant in the long term. Because beneath the analysis, beneath the speculation, there remained a sense that the full impact of this moment had not yet been fully understood. And as the dust begins to settle, one question remains at the center of it all. This was never just about a balcony appearance. It was about a future quietly set in motion, a future that may already be unfolding faster than anyone expected. What seemed, at first, like a controlled and carefully delivered moment has now begun to reveal its true weight. The significance was never confined to the words themselves. It lived in what those words set into motion. That single appearance, framed within tradition, has come to represent something far more defining. A turning point, not loud, not chaotic, but unmistakably decisive. And as the layers continue to unfold, one reality becomes increasingly clear. The course has already been set. At the center of this shift stand William, Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, no longer positioned on the edge of leadership, but firmly within it. What once felt like preparation has transitioned into execution. Their role is no longer theoretical, it is active, shaping, guiding, and, in many ways, defining the direction the monarchy is now taking. This is not simply about stepping forward when the time comes. It is about recognizing that the time is already here. The implications of this moment stretch far beyond the present. The Crown, an institution built on continuity, now faces the challenge of remaining relevant in a world that demands constant evolution. And within that challenge lies a delicate balance. Too much change risks weakening the very foundation that gives the monarchy its identity. Too little risks making it feel distant, disconnected, unable to resonate with a modern audience. Navigating that balance is not simple. It requires precision, restraint, and an understanding that every decision carries consequences that will echo far into the future. What makes this moment particularly powerful is how controlled it has been. There has been no abrupt disruption, no visible fracture. Instead, there has been a steady, deliberate movement towards something new, a transition that feels managed, guided, almost inevitable. And yet, beneath that control lies tension, the awareness that transformation, no matter how carefully executed, always comes with uncertainty. The monarchy now stands at the threshold of a new phase, not one defined by sudden change, but by quiet evolution. A phase where leadership is more visible, more engaged, more directly connected to the expectations of the world watching. And within that phase, the roles of William and Catherine take on even greater significance. They are not just inheritors of tradition, they are its interpreters, its protectors, and, perhaps most importantly, its architects. Looking ahead, the legacy of this moment will not be measured by immediate reactions or short-term interpretations. It will be measured by what follows, by how the decisions made now shape the institution in the years to come, by whether this carefully set direction leads to stability, to renewal, or to challenges that have yet to fully emerge. Because history rarely reveals its meaning in the moment, it reveals it over time. And yet, even without that distance, there is already a sense that something fundamental has shifted. That what began as a single, composed appearance has grown into something far more enduring, a marker, a signal, a quiet declaration that the future is no longer approaching, it has already begun. Because what began as a single moment on a balcony may ultimately be remembered as the day the future of the monarchy was quietly decided. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.